The average American at 40 has $593,109 in retirement savings. That's the headline. That's what gets quoted. And if you've been around long enough to be suspicious of headlines, here's what that number is hiding. The median, the actual number in the middle, is $220,919, according to Empower's data from March 2026. And that's only for people who have anything at all. When you pull in the Federal Reserve's full survey of consumer finances and include every American family, including the roughly 54% who report no dedicated retirement savings whatsoever, the true median across all families drops to $87,000. The number most people are benchmarking against doesn't belong to anyone who actually exists. You thought you were watching a scoreboard. You were watching a highlight reel. I'm Tom from Lazy Investor. I've spent 10 plus years running my own business, surrounded by accountants and tax lawyers who taught me how money actually moves. Not how it's supposed to move, but how it moves in practice for real people, inside real systems, with real incentives. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested myself. I don't tell you this to flex. I tell you this because what I'm about to lay out isn't theoretical. I've lived inside these numbers. Today, I'm going to walk you through 4 specific reasons why the retirement math most 40-year-olds are using is built on assumptions that have quietly expired. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they don't care, because the scoreboard only counts what it can see. And there are 4 things it cannot see. The scoreboard. Hold on to that image. Whenever someone quotes you an average retirement balance, picture a stadium scoreboard. It shows a number in real time. It counts what's happening on the field, but it only counts the players who showed up. Half the seats are empty. And sitting in the luxury boxes above you, 5 individuals with 8 and 9-figure portfolios are pulling the average toward the stratosphere. The scoreboard isn't lying to you maliciously. It's doing exactly what scoreboards do. It counts what it can measure. The problem is the selection criteria it can't show you. That scoreboard is going to be the thread running through this entire conversation. Every time a number sounds too clean, too impressive, too precise to be true, ask yourself, who does this scoreboard exclude? In a few minutes, I'm going to show you why the benchmark almost every major financial institution gives you for age 40 was calibrated on a structural assumption that is now an active legal risk. But first, let me show you the reversal that takes most people completely by surprise. Fidelity, Vanguard, virtually every major brokerage uses the same framework. At 30, have 1 times your annual salary saved. At 40, 3 times. At 50, 6 times. At 60, 8 times. At 67, 10 times. The guideline is everywhere. Kiplinger cites it, Northwestern Mutual cites it, financial advisors put it in every meeting deck. And at the median salary for 35 to 44-year-olds, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics put at $72,000, $20 for 2025 3 times means your target at 40 is approximately $216,000. Now, the median retirement savings for Americans in their 40s is $220,919 per Empower's March 2026 data. The median 40-year-old is basically right on target. I will let that sit. You expected me to tell you everyone is dramatically behind. The title says, most are shocked. They are, but not because they're far off the benchmark. They're shocked because the benchmark is driving with a broken GPS, and the system designers forgot to mention that the coordinates in the GPS were programmed in a world that no longer exists. Here's what the 3 times salary at 40 rule was designed around. It assumes you retire at 67. It assumes a diversified portfolio grows over time. And it assumes this is the load-bearing wall, the one nobody points at, that Social Security replaces roughly 40% of your pre-retirement income. That 40% backstop is baked into the entire framework. Without it, the math doesn't work at all. The Social Security OAC Trust Fund is projected to be depleted in 2033. At that point, retirees will face an automatic 23% benefit cut under the law. But that was the June 2025 estimate. By August 2025, the program's own chief actuary revised the timeline. The insolvency date accelerated to late 2032 due to the reconciliation law's effect on taxation of benefits. The Congressional Budget Office's February 2026 update is even grimmer. The OAC Trust Fund is now projected to be exhausted in fiscal year 2032, resulting in an immediate, across-the-board benefit cut of 28% in 2033. A typical couple retiring shortly after the trust fund runs out will face an $18,400 cut to their annual benefits, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Do the math on what this does to the guideline. If Social Security was supposed to replace 40% of your income and now delivers somewhere between 29 and 32% instead, because 23 to 28% of benefits just got cut by statute, the 3 times salary benchmark leaves you materially short for the same retirement outcome. You'd need closer to 4.5 times your salary at 40 to absorb that structural shift. At the median salary, that's $324,000. The median has $220,000. The benchmark looks accurate. The benchmark is wrong. I want to be careful here. Maybe Congress fixes this. Maybe they raise the payroll tax cap. Maybe they adjust the retirement age. Maybe a bipartisan deal materializes between now and 2032. But here's the thing about plans that depend on legislative rescue. The longer Congress waits to act, the harder solving Social Security's financial challenge becomes. This has been known for decades. Congress last reformed the program more than 40 years ago. The track record on proactive action is not encouraging. The point is not catastrophism. The point is that your retirement plan has a structural dependency, Social Security at full value, and that dependency is now an active legal risk, not a background assumption. The scoreboard says you're on track. The scoreboard forgot to account for the fact that the goalposts are moving. Now here's the piece of this story that gets stranger the deeper you look. Because the headline number, $593,109 average for 40-year-olds, isn't just misleading in the way any average is misleading. It's misleading in a more fundamental way. And this is where the scoreboard metaphor cuts the deepest. Over half of American households, 54%, report having no dedicated retirement savings, according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances cited by Kiplinger. None. Zero. Not somewhat behind. Nothing. Not $1 in an IRA. Not one contribution ever made to a 401k. By the way, hit subscribe if you're finding this useful. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again, and the next one I'm working on is going to be even more specific than this one. When you compute the average retirement savings across people who actually have accounts, you get impressive numbers. When you include everyone, the full population of American families, the average retirement savings for all families is $333,940. The median is $87,000. That's across all ages. The people in their 50s and 60s with decades of compounding behind them are in that number. And the median is still $87,000. Only 5% of households with retirement accounts have $1 million or more saved. Of the 54.3% of US households that have any money in retirement accounts, only about 9.3% have $500,000 or more. Think about what this means for the headline average. The number is being dragged skyward by a tiny group of very large portfolios. The vast majority of Americans, including people in their 50s, people who are 5 years from the conventional retirement age, are sitting on numbers that look nothing like the headline. There's a story that explains this dynamic better than any statistic. Back around 2007, 2008, the financial industry built elaborate models to price mortgage-backed securities. The models were not obviously fraudulent. The people running them were often brilliant. The problem was a selection bias baked into the foundational assumption. Housing prices, as measured in the dataset they were using, had never had a nationwide decline in the modern era. So the model said nationwide housing declines were essentially impossible. When housing prices fell nationally for the first time in decades, the model wasn't wrong in a small way. It was catastrophically wrong, because the one scenario it didn't price was the scenario that actually happened. Retirement benchmarks have the same structure. The average at 40 is 593,000 model works beautifully if you only include people who showed up to play. It falls apart when you realize the players who showed up are a specific subset of the population, higher income, higher education, more likely to have employer-sponsored plans, and that the half of Americans who didn't show up are going to be depending on Social Security as their primary or only income source in retirement. The same Social Security that is now legally scheduled to cut benefits by 23 to 28% in 7 years. Here's the part that never makes it into a standard retirement calculator. I built a digital book called The Exit Code. It's an analysis of 50 years of actual retirement data distilled into a mathematical framework for identifying when you can actually exit the rat race. Not when you're technically allowed to, according to a benchmark. When the math genuinely works for your specific situation, including the sequence of returns risk that destroys early retirees, the Social Security timing decision that most people get badly wrong, and the insurance gap that costs retirees under 65 an average of $14,000 a year in premiums they weren't planning for. The book covers the dynamic withdrawal method, a replacement for the 4% rule that adjusts based on what the market is actually doing in the critical years around your retirement, which is when you're most vulnerable to permanent damage from a downturn. It also covers the Social Security bridge strategy, how to delay your Social Security claim until age 70, where every year of delay gives you an 8% permanent increase in monthly benefits without running out of money in the years you're waiting. These aren't opinions or general advice. They're frameworks built on 50 years of data. You can get it through the link in the description for less than a restaurant dinner. Every year this sits in your blind spot, compounds against you. Now, let's talk about the fee that most people have been paying for years and have literally never noticed. This is where a character enters the story. Meet Marcus, 41 years old, marketing manager at a mid-sized tech-adjacent company in the Southeast, earns $74,000 a year, has $163,000 in his 401k, which puts him just above the median 401k balance for his age group of $154,000, $212 per Empower's latest data. He checks his balance twice a year. He knows the market has been turbulent. He knows he's doing okay. Nothing about his financial life raises a red flag. He's a responsible person. Marcus has no idea what he is paying in fees. The average 401k participant is paying roughly 0.71% all in, according to Truthify's 2026 analysis. That's already higher than most people think. Marcus, though, is in a plan at a mid-sized company. His mutual funds carry expense ratios averaging 0.9%. Administrative record keeping and plan management fees add another 0.4%. His all-in cost is approximately 1.3% per year. That's $2,119 this year on his current balance. Next year, if his account grows to $180,000, the fee is $2,340. The percentage never changes. The dollar amount grows silently because it's calculated on a growing base. Here's what that actually costs Marcus over his career. The cost of a 1% expense ratio versus 0.1% represents a 22.4% loss of ending wealth after 30 years. At 1.5%, the loss climbs to 32.7%. At 2%, the investor forfeits more than 41% of what the portfolio would have produced at a near zero cost. For Marcus specifically, the difference between 1.3% all-in fees and 0.1% fees over 26 years on his current and future contributions is roughly in the range of $220,000 to $250,000 of ending wealth, depending on how aggressively he contributes. That number is buried in fractional percentages that no statement ever flags in red. No invoice ever arrives. The money isn't taken, it's withheld silently from growth that would otherwise have compounded in his name. Marcus is not an outlier. Over 70% of 401k participants say they don't pay any fees at all, according to an AARP study. The 401k was adopted in 1978, and for nearly 30 years, plan providers did not disclose fees to participants. In 2012, the Department of Justice ordered 401k providers to disclose all fees, but the fees are often embedded in fund prospectuses and behind many pages of complicated legal jargon. This is the scoreboard lying again. The balance you see on your screen is already net of fees. You can't see the drain because it's invisible by design. The money was never there for you to watch leave. I thought my 401k was free, Marcus says. I've never written a check. He's not wrong. He's never written a check. The mechanism just doesn't need a check. An investor who puts $100,000 into a fund with 0.5% in fees at 7% returns over 30 years ends up with about $574,000. The same investor paying 1.5% ends up with about $432,000. That is a $142,000 difference. Funds lost entirely to fees, not lost to bad investments, not lost to poor decisions, lost to a line item in a document nobody reads. The fix requires about 15 minutes and the login credentials to your retirement account. Find the expense ratio for each fund you're invested in. Add up the administrative and record-keeping fees from your annual fee disclosure, which your employer is legally required to provide. If your total all-in cost exceeds 0.5%, you have actionable room. Most large company plans include S&P 500 index funds or total market index funds with expense ratios under 0.05%. If your plan has them and you're not in them, that's the adjustment. If your plan doesn't have them, that's a conversation to have with HR. Low-cost options in employer plans have been the industry standard for years. If yours doesn't have them, that's a decision someone made that isn't working in your favor. There is an absurdity to this situation that I genuinely find amusing rather than enraging. The financial industry spent decades building products that extracted wealth from retirement accounts silently in fractions of a percent, while simultaneously convincing the people in those accounts that investing is complicated and you need professionals to manage it. The entire business model requires your confusion. The moment you understand how expense ratios compound, the math on active management becomes very hard to defend. Index funds, low cost, boring, effective. The scoreboard likes them. Now, we've covered the broken benchmark, the actual distribution of savings, and the silent fee drain. Here's the fourth piece. And this is the one that most fundamentally rewrites the game theory of every retirement decision you're making right now. I want to tell you about a study that ProPublica and the Urban Institute conducted over 2 decades, tracking approximately 20,000 Americans from the time they turned 50 through the rest of their working lives, using the Health and Retirement Study, one of the most comprehensive data sets on aging in America. Between the time older workers enter the study and when they leave paid employment, 56% are laid off at least once or leave jobs under such financially damaging circumstances that it's likely they were pushed out rather than choosing to go voluntarily. 56%, more than a coin flip. And this is the most alarming part. The researchers focused specifically on workers who enter their 50s with stable, full-time jobs and who've been with the same employer for at least 5 years, those least likely to encounter employment problems. These are not people in precarious positions. These are the people who, from the outside, look like they're going to glide to 65 without incident. 28% of these stable, long-time employees sustained at least one damaging, employer-driven layoff between turning 50 and leaving work for retirement. An additional 13% unexpectedly retired under conditions that suggest they were forced out. They begin by telling survey takers they plan to keep working for many years, but within a couple of years, they suddenly announce they've retired amid a substantial drop in earnings and income. A further 15% quit or leave after reporting their pay, hours, work locations, or treatment by supervisors deteriorated. Add those together, you get 56%. Here's why this is a 40-year-old's problem and not a 55-year-old's problem. The 55-year-old can see the cliff. The 40-year-old is still far enough from it that it looks like a distant line on the horizon, something to think about later. I'll work until 67. That's the plan. And the entire retirement calculation, the monthly contribution rate, the risk tolerance, the decision to defer savings for the kitchen renovation, the decision to catch up later is built on that plan holding. But if 56% of workers in stable, long-term jobs end up getting pushed out before they choose to leave, and the typical forced exit happens somewhere in the late 50s, then the plan to work until 67 has a more than even chance of being wrong. And the financial gap between I planned to 67 and had to stop at 62 is not a rounding error. It's 5 years of contributions at peak earnings gone. It's claiming Social Security at 62 instead of 70, permanently locking in a 30 to 32% lower monthly benefit for the rest of your life. It's leaving a job before Medicare eligibility at 65, meaning you need to bridge 3 years of private health insurance, which costs, on average, more than $14,000 per year per person, in the gap between employer coverage and Medicare. 43% of people who retired earlier than planned did so for employment-related reasons, loss of a job, organizational changes at work, or being offered a retirement buyout. Only 21% of people who retired sooner than planned did so because they were financially able to. Marcus, in our running example, works in marketing at a tech-adjacent firm. Notable job losses in the professional and business services industry in recent months include widespread layoffs at high-profile tech firms as companies restructure and leverage AI applications for many tasks. His industry is not a safe harbor. And if Marcus gets pushed out at 58, instead of retiring at 67, 9 fewer years of contributions, a smaller portfolio, Social Security claimed early, every dollar he didn't contribute between now and 58 shows up as a permanent shortfall. Older workers perceive age discrimination as the #1 barrier to finding work. Among respondents who believe finding a job would be difficult, 1/3 blame age discrimination as the main reason. The recovery rate for workers displaced in their late 50s is genuinely low. As many as 22 million Americans over 50 have or will suffer a layoff, forced retirement, or other involuntary job separation. Of these, only a little over 2 million have recovered or will. The scoreboard doesn't show Marcus the probability that someone else fills in the exit date before he does, but the data has been counting. Let me now run the actual math for someone in Marcus's general position. You're 40, you have $150,000 invested, and you're going to add $600 a month going forward, 7% average annual return. You do this for 27 years to age 67. The ending nominal balance is approximately $1,468,000, which is almost exactly the $1.46 million that Americans in 2026 say they need to retire comfortably. According to Kiplinger's data, citing Northwestern Mutual Research. Looks clean. Except here's the part that gets skipped. That $1.46 million figure comes from a survey asking Americans how much they think they need in today's dollars. In 27 years, with inflation running at 3% annually, the historical average $1.46 million in today's purchasing power requires approximately $3.3 million in nominal dollars. The 7% nominal return on your $150,000 plus 600 monthly contributions gets you to 1.47 million nominal. In real terms, you're at about 44 cents on the dollar relative to what you'll actually need. Now adjust for fee drag. If Marcus's all-in fee is 1.3% instead of 0.1%, a 1.2% gap, the compound impact over 26 years takes roughly 22 to 30% off his ending balance, depending on contribution rate. His nominal 1.47 million becomes something closer to 1 million to 1,100,000. In real terms, he's further behind. The math is not a horror story if you act now. At 40, the compounding window is still meaningful. About 3 in 5 American workers, 58%, say their retirement savings are behind where they should be. But the problem isn't just the amount saved. It's that the 3 variables we've covered, the broken Social Security dependency in the benchmark, the invisible fee drain, and the assumption of uninterrupted employment compound against each other in ways that a standard retirement calculator doesn't capture. The fix for the fee issue is a 15-minute audit. The fix for the Social Security risk is running your numbers with a 20% haircut on your projected benefits. The fix for the forced exit risk is aiming for a retirement-capable balance by 62, not 67, treating the extra 5 years as gravy rather than load-bearing structure. And this brings us to the 3 takeaways I want you to leave with. These are not save more and start early. You know those. These are calibrated to exactly what we covered today. First, do the fee audit right now. Not this week, today. Log into your 401k. Find the expense ratio of every fund you're in. Find your plan's annual fee disclosure and add up the administrative and record-keeping charges. If your all-in cost exceeds 0.5%, you have a concrete action item. If you have access to index funds inside your plan with expense ratios below 0.1% and you're not in them, move a meaningful portion of your allocation there. The mathematical case for doing this is not subtle or conditional. A 0.5% fee difference on a $100,000 initial investment costs approximately $165,800 over 30 years in loss compounding. That number scales linearly with your balance. Marcus's $200,000 plus compounding loss lives in a few checkbox clicks he's been putting off. Second, rerun your retirement projection without the full Social Security backstop. Take your socialsecurity.gov projected monthly benefit at 67. Reduce it by 20%. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's the legally mandated outcome if Congress does nothing before 2032 based on the Social Security Chief Actuary's own projections. If your retirement plan still works at 80% of projected Social Security, you're resilient. If it doesn't work without the full benefit, you have a dependency that a government agency has formally identified as threatened. Plan accordingly. Third, build your portfolio target backward from 62, not 67. Keep 67 as your preferred exit. Make 62 your funded plan B. The financial difference between the two scenarios is roughly 5 years of contributions and Social Security timing. If you hit 62 with enough to retire, you have the luxury of working 5 more years and arriving at 67 richer and more secure than you planned. If you hit 62 underfunded and get pushed out anyway, you have a crisis. The insurance policy against forced early exit is the balance you build between now and your late 50s. That balance starts with what you do between now and the next contribution deadline. Marcus, by the end of this, he runs the fee audit. He finds 1.3% all in. He moves to index funds inside his existing plan, dropping to 0.1%. He doesn't change his contribution rate yet, he starts there. That single change, compounded over 26 years, adds somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 to his ending balance. His scoreboard starts showing a different number, not because the system changed, because he finally understood what the scoreboard was counting. There's an old parable about a man who spent years trying to fill a bathtub, frustrated that no matter how much water he ran, the level barely rose. One day he finally looked beneath the tub. The drain had been open the entire time. He hadn't been failing to fill the tub. He'd been filling the drain. The retirement system in America runs on a structurally open drain. The benchmark is calibrated wrong. The Social Security assumption has an expiration date. The fee leaves silently. The employment timeline is shorter than most people build for. None of this is secret. All of it is calculable. According to a 2025 survey by the Employee Benefit Research Institute, only 28% of American workers are very confident they will be able to retire comfortably. The other 72% have a vague, uncomfortable feeling that something is off. This video is an attempt to name specifically what is off, because a vague feeling doesn't produce action. Numbers produce action. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. The average at 40 is $593,000. The median is $220,000. The real median, including everyone, is $87,000. The benchmark was built for a Social Security program that is now legally scheduled to cut benefits by 24 to 28%. The fee is invisible, and it costs 6 figures over a career. And more than half of people who plan to work until 67 won't get to choose. The scoreboard is still lying. You just learned where to look for the